I'm pleased to welcome you all on to this webinar on building bridges between science and parliamentarians for the good of society. We have been working for the past 8 years trying to bring back science to the parliamentary multilateral community. And since our start and until now, it was an effort to bring back the attention. And today is an important time. It is setting the stage for the expecting institutionalization and the operationalization of an IPU working group on science technology later this year. The working group will serve as a bridge between political and scientific processes, bringing them together for the benefit of humanity and all mankind. I am pleased now to introduce the president of the IPU, Mr. Duarte Pacheco, who has been very strong supporter of science in the IPU and a very strong enthusiast about the operationalization of science. Even today, he was supposed to attend with us, but due to planes, so right now he sent a message from even waiting from the airport just to us. So I would like for all of us to listen to the message, and thank you very much.
Dear friends and colleagues, the Grupo on Science and Technology was created in 2019. It shows how important is science to IPU. And we know that scientists need politicians and the politicians need the scientists. The scientists need politicians because for their research and to find what they wish, they need resources, public resources, much times in all countries of the world. But we politicians, we need to know that to achieve our goals of development in industry and in health, for instance, we need the scientists to do a very practical work. And so, this group will join politicians and scientists working together, side by side, discussing all issues that can improve our world and try to get a better life to the human beings. I hope this webinar will be a success. The first one, not the last one.
I would like to thank the President for these kind words and opening remarks. I know for sure that he wanted to attend here personally and to join us. And I know that he did the effort to send us this message as a commitment from his presidency for the IPU. I also know that our Secretary General, who is a supporter for this initiative, is also sending his strong support and appreciation for this activity. I would like now to introduce the moderator of this event, a wonderful scientist, Antonella Del Rosso. Antonella is a member of CERN Education, Communication and Outreach Group, trained as a physicist. Antonella has been working in science communication over the last 25 years in CERN. CERN is really the Mecca of science, one of the most renowned scientific organizations in the world, and one which IPU has worked very hard to bring scientists closer to parliamentarians, to narrow the gap between both worlds right now. This webinar is indeed part of this effort. Antonella will moderate this event and the open discussions that will follow, the short presentation of our honorable, amazing panelists. And the floor is yours, Antonella. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Omar. It's a real honor for me to be here, to be moderating this roundtable. This webinar is an historic moment, and we can feel it. Around us, there are very, very important panelists, and I'm going to introduce them to you. However, let me just first remind a few things for the audience, because we will have each speaker will have 5 minutes to present their messages and share them with you. These will be followed by a live discussion. And to make the discussion really live, we really need you to take part in this. And you can send us your questions. There is a Q&A option on the command line. And please use it. We will see your questions and I will try to address them as much as possible with the speakers, of course. So it is important. There is also an option for you to select your language, your preferred language, which can be either French or English. Most of the speakers will speak in English, in the original language, but Monsieur Larive will speak in French. Thank you for this diversity around the table. This is also important. Let's just stop here. If you have any questions from the audience, please send them on the Q&A. Let's start with the introduction of the speakers, of the panelists. So I have mentioned Monsieur Larive. Monsieur Larive is a French member of parliament and founder of the IPU Working Group on Science and Technology that we are discussing today. Around the table is also Marianne Amir Azer, former Egyptian member of parliament and member of the Global Advisory Board on Emerging Technologies. Another member of the panel is Professor Rolf Verheuyen. He is president of the Sesame Council and also former Director General of CERN. And Professor Karen Hallberg, connecting from Argentina, thank you. She is a research director at the Bariloche Atomic Center in Argentina and laureate of the 2019 L'Oreal UNESCO Award for Women in Science. So again, each panelist now have 5 minutes to share their messages. And Professor Verheuyen, we will start with you. Thank you again for being with us today. And thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Antonella. I'm very pleased to be a member of this panel, and I'm very pleased to open, so to speak, this working group in the IPU. Now, science, comprising all sciences, from natural to social sciences, is one of the most important drivers of our daily life. I think it's undeniable that science has led us to a better world than that inhabited by our ancestors, and that it will continue to deliver intellectual and economic progress. Today, challenges are global, and they are social, economic, and environmental in nature. They require global strategies and global collaboration. And science is the tool to tackle these challenges, because science is global. It knows no borders. The laws of nature are the same everywhere. But global strategies are not enough. We also need effective local implementation. And there, I think the IPU can play a very strong role. The IPU, with parliamentarians from all over the world, is a unique body in that sense to connect the global and the local aspects. But for doing this most effectively, it has to connect policy and science. That was my first key message. Science is an extremely powerful undertaking, and it's one that is not always linear. I think no one can deny that science has led us up blind alleys, or it has taken us wrong turnings. Yet its strength lies in its ability to process data, to self-correct, and to form choices based on the best available evidence. In other words, and that's my key message number 2, Society, including politicians, needs to understand how science works to be able to judge its outcome. And for this, we need to connect and to talk with each other, politicians and scientists. The next step is to use science for policy. Political decisions need to be based on the best available information, the best available scientific evidence. Scientists are there to advise policy, to identify options, to give recommendations, but the decisions lie in the hands of the politicians because they have to consider also other boundary conditions. We, that means scientists and politicians, need to interact as much as possible, but we have to keep a clear separation between advice or recommendation and the political decision. Science needs judgment, needs critical thinking, and in turn, it can and should train judgment and critical thinking. The more we read and hear in short time, the more critical it is to be critical, not only in science, but in general. So my key message number 4, there is a strong need to educate, to train critical minds, and science is a good tool for this. So these are some of the reasons why science and society must connect. Why scientists and general public, including policymakers, must get together, must talk with each other. But there's a slight problem. The language. We need to understand the meaning of the words, of the expressions which are being used. Just an example. What means truth? What means proof? Or what is uncertainty? Different people have different understanding or different interpretations of such words. Key message number 5, we need to have a common understanding of the language used. And that needs interaction between all parties involved. And very importantly, it needs open minds. Finally, science and the free dissemination of scientific knowledge foster dialogue among cultures and are instrumental in fostering peaceful relations between nations. Best examples of science for peace are CERN, which was founded shortly after World War II, and Sesame in the Middle East, which was inaugurated 2017, where the members are Cyprus, Egypt, Iran, Israel, Jordan, Pakistan, Palestine, and Turkey. And scientific results are flowing out now, out of this facility. This is a great achievement. And it proves my key message number 6. Science is a universal language and bridges cultures and nations. And the working group of the IPU will be an important pillar of this bridge. Let me end my short introduction here with my personal message. Science is fun. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Hoyer. I confirm science is really fun. And let's give the floor to Marianne Azer. Thank you for joining us as well. And thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you. The floor is yours. Can you please unmute? You should unmute.
Unmute. Marianne, unmute. Open your mic.
Thank you, Antonella, for the introduction, and thank you, Ambassador Mukhtar Omar, gathering, and happy to hear the message of you, President. I will switch. I have a small presentation to share. Okay. So during the last year, the COVID was introduced to our lives.
Okay, yeah, unfortunately we can't hear her.
And everyone was hurrying up the scientists, the vaccines, and policy was based in all countries on the feedback of the scientists. But is it always the case?
Okay, so no, sorry, this is really not working, unfortunately. Sorry about that. We will get back to Marianne and try to get her sound fixed. In the meantime, I would like to ask.
Can you hear me now?
Not,
can you hear me now?
Really not well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that. Marianne, we can perhaps fix your sound offline, and I will give the floor. I'll give the floor to Professor Hallberg. In the meantime, Professor Hallberg, thank you again for joining us.
Hello, everybody. It's difficult to say hello and not say good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here. I'd like to first thank the IPU and also Antonella Del Rosso from CERN for the invitation. It is a great pleasure and honor for me to share the panel with Michel Larive, Rolf Hoyer, and Marianne Asser. I also welcome all of you, and I really welcome this initiative. I'd like to congratulate the IPU for establishing the Working Group on Science and Technology. It's a very important initiative, and I hope it is followed by parliaments in all the other countries. In my short presentation, I'd like to address two fundamental issues. The first is given the overall penetration of technology and information in our everyday life, scientific literacy is as important today as literacy was in the past for citizens and governments. As a second point, I would also emphasize that given the huge amount of knowledge and information, scientific literacy alone is not enough, and we need to develop a scientific thinking, critical thinking. I'm very happy to realize that my main messages have a huge overlap with Professor Hoyer's, and thank you very much, Rolf Hoyer, for your presentation. So I think we are both emphasizing the main messages that go in similar lines. We know very well that science and technology are ubiquitous. They exist in every day of our everyday life. We humans have evolved into a highly technological society. Technology is everywhere. There are very few examples I can think of that do not involve technological development, including the technologies that are most important today and are evolving very rapidly are artificial intelligence, cognitive sciences, big data, quantum technologies, nuclear, biotechnology, digital, space, etc. I will concentrate on the technical developments, but of course, social sciences are also very important to be included into this working group, because the social sciences together with natural and exact sciences are a whole body of scientific evidence that should be taken into account. These technologies are not only beneficial to us, but some of them, and dependent on how they're used, are also posing threats to the environment, to the climate, to society, and to ourselves, all human beings. This is a very important issue that must be addressed, the ethical issues and the implementations of technology. We are not only living in the age of technology, but it is also developing very fast. And we're also bombarded with huge amounts of information we must learn to deal with. This leads us to ask ourselves several important questions, such as, for example, are our decisions based only on emotions or gut feelings, or are we well informed? How can we overcome our prejudices? Are our democracies threatened by false information we can't properly deal with? Other questions we can think about is to reflect on, based on what criteria do our representatives choose their agenda? What are the important issues in our world? Do our governments and representatives have the necessary scientific knowledge or the adequate assessment to make decisions? And with us, does the scientific community get involved in public affairs or in popularizing science? So here I emphasize my first point. Given the overall penetration of technology and information in our everyday life, scientific literacy is as important today as literacy in the past for citizens and governments. Otherwise, who will be taking the decisions for us? On the other hand, my second point, the knowledge we have acquired and mastered as human beings is so large that we can only grasp a very small part of it. We cannot expect to learn all that knowledge. In this age of technology and information, we need a deep cultural change. We must acquire other skills. It is not enough to learn to read and write and to acquire basic mathematical skills and basic scientific knowledge. If we citizens, politicians, parliamentarians want to survive and thrive in our modern world, we need to develop a scientific way of thinking. We must learn to think critically, because we cannot learn all the information. We have to learn how to manage it. As a famous astronomer and science communicator Carl Sagan said during his last interview in 1996, science is more than a body of knowledge. It is a way of thinking, a way of skeptically interrogating the universe with a fine understanding of human fallibility. I love those words. This scientific way of thinking involves being able to think logically as precisely as possible, with numbers when possible, arguing with evidence and facts, acknowledging one's mistakes and learning to listen to others, being creative, innovative, and inspired. As was beautifully written in the Russellian Manifesto issued in 1955 as a call to bring scientific rationale to solve our problems, it says, Russellian said, we have to learn to think in a new way. By the way, this is the only way to deal with the other pandemic, which is produced by the virus of false information and alternative facts. To end, I would like to emphasize that our future will depend on how wisely we manage information for the benefit of humanity. And to this end, we not only need the scientific input which gives us the knowledge, but we also need to improve our critical thinking to be able to handle it. I am optimistic with the establishment of the working group on science and technology. The links between knowledge, which links the scientific and knowledge, scientific rationale and decision making will be definitely strengthened for the betterment of society. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Harber. Thank you for your very positive thoughts and that you just shared with us. This is really nice. I would like now to give the floor to Monsieur Michel Larive. Je vais parler en français pour ça. Oui, je pense qu'on peut vous entendre.
So I will introduce him in French now. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to be here today. Indeed, since 2017, with Martin Shungun and his support as a General Secretary of the IPU, we've been working on the creation of this working group on science and bridging the gap with human societies. I completely agree with everything that was said by Karen and Rolf. As legitimate representatives of our people, we as parliamentarians have the supreme honor and the heavy responsibility to contribute in forging the rule of law and the law. And in my view, our work must be driven by the collective interests. We need to protect our world, because if it were to be broken down, the very survival of the human species will be threatened. So we need background on various areas. To deal with all these issues, we must build our decision on social, economical, philosophical, and secular data, so that we do not act without prior thinking in order to preserve the nation's integrity. Parliaments from all over the world must create tools to give a proper framework to the development of technologies in order to avoid misuse in our societies. Technologies are an anthropologic way forward for empowerment and liberation. This continuous growth must be positive for humankind. The profits that can be gained from some scientific research, as we have seen in the health sector, when pandemics do not know any border, the access to vaccines is not the same everywhere. So human societies do not benefit from the same, and this creates great geopolitical differences and creates migration issues. So this can only lead to a catastrophe if humanist solutions are not offered. And now we must break from the myth of Prometheus and find a way to extend technologies to everyone. There is a threat that could lead to obscurantism. Theses have been developed by the past, and Aldous Huxley, in his book, developed it. We must protect populations from a dystopic future based on inhuman as the human body could be used for private property and not be considered as it should. What about a day when science could predict our thinking? What would such a technological tool mean? This technology would have rights in itself and could develop a proper critical thinking and show a personal opinion and become a being in itself. And then they could be organized as a society and transform the whole meaning of society. So there could be a world where human beings are not part of the humanity anymore. So we need to regulate the usage of scientific and technological tools The IPU working group will help us draft the first international code of ethics on the use of operation of technoscience. And then this can be used all over the world. It should take into account all the segments of society, citizens, politicians, artists, and the civil society as a whole. We need to protect fundamental rights and prevent every risk of every threat to our society. We must require barriers so that AI and its applications, especially in robotics, becomes untrustworthy. We must give it a legal framework and ask if we need to create a legal status for AI. We must be careful and question on a regular basis new tools, especially AI and other algorithms, so that we can always explain what and how it is used. I support the fact that technology are helping human societies, but they must not replace the humans. The market must not be left the only master. I am in favor of cooperation instead of competition. We must encourage peace and coordination amongst people. Thank you very much, Mr. Larive. You've mentioned many points. We will speak about it in further details during our discussion.
Issues with the technical issues that, yes, we can try. Okay, that is working. Dr. Azer, you could perhaps try to speak. Now I see myself twice. We cannot hear you, so perhaps you're still muted. If you could unmute. Dr. Azer?
Sorry for that. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
I'm happy. Okay, sorry for that. I will talk about something that dates a year ago when the COVID was sadly introduced to our lives. And people were urging the scientists to talk more about the virus, about the medicines, about the vaccines. Policies were made in different countries accordingly. And my question is it always the same that we have like policymakers and scientists communicate, or is there a gap or a bridge? So I'll address in three very short questions: the what, the why, and how can things happen. So the what is, what are the global trends? What are the computing trends? What are the data trends there? And the policy initiatives that need to be there are constrained by physical restraints, efficiency, transparency, and being citizens focused. Another question is, what are the societal challenges there? Other than healthcare, there is the climate change, there are the water resources, and many more. Imagine a session where there are policymakers and there are audience hearing about the climate change that triggers epidemics. And the problem would be that warming allows diseases to spread and become more severe. And the implications would be that we need to prepare for the futures. So the policymakers decide to have plans like short-term and long-term, preparing research with funds and legislations to monitor emissions, and the benefits would be minimizing the impact of the future outbreaks. The next thing is, and that the question we're asking, why is there a gap between scientists and policymakers? There was that interesting survey that most of people agreed on, that scientists and governments are not communicating with the public enough. Those who regulate science need to communicate with the public, with 83% agreement that they need to do so. And another thing is that the policymakers, in most of the cases, are not basically scientists with a scientific background, which things that happen is that scientists and policymakers speak different languages, and the long reports are not read by politicians, already facing great pressures on their time, and we all know this as parliamentarians. So my last question here is how? The IPU working group is a light in the dark, and we need to balance the laws and policy that shape science and using science to influence the law and policy. So the expression of the politicization of science is important. If science is the systematic pursuit of knowledge and politics based on compromise in pursuit of a desired end, then the combination of two would be the politicization of science. And this is what we need to use the systematic knowledge as a means of negotiation and compromising to have a desired end. Something important that we need to take into consideration are the factors affecting the policy formulation process. The factors are diverse. They're the political context, the evidence based on science and technology, and the media and advocacy. The three must intersect, and the intersection is the major player. We need to analyze the policy research, we need to have scientific information exchange and campaigning and lobbying as well. That's why we have a good ecosystem of a policy formulation process. And the science to policy advice have certain requirements like being independent, efficient, transparent, integrity, and having interdisciplinary aspects to address diversity. So we have to admit there is a research gap. The researchers cannot understand why there is a resistance to policy change despite clear and convincing evidence. And the policymaker, they don't understand the inability of researchers to make their findings accessible and digestible in time for policy decisions. So to bridge the gap, there must be a science-based policy making the politicization. When there is a demand for policymakers, they have incentives and capacity in access and use of research, and the supply from the scientific research community effectively communicated to policymakers and from the specialist advisory bodies. And then the policymakers can access and use research to inform policy. And finally, evidence-based policy contributes to the development. A final word is that science communication is so important, and it has an important ingredient, which is scientists contributing to the ecosystem of policy making together with policymakers and journalists contributing to the public, to the scientists, to the politicians. This is a whole ecosystem. Finally, science and politics must shake hands, and I believe that the IPU Working Group on Science and Technology will help both to shake hands and to go along. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I confirm that we could hear you, which is great. So thanks again, the sound worked, and now we can open the discussion. Yes, we can open the discussion now. Thank you very much. We have already quite a few questions from the audience. So I'd like to start with Professor Hoyer, a question to Professor Hoyer. As Ambassador Omar said at the beginning of this webinar, this webinar actually happens a few years after IPU and CERN started to talk to each other and in a new way. And the dream, I think, since the beginning was to get scientists closer to parliamentarians and vice versa. So when, I mean, a few years ago, when all this started, how were you imagining the world, and how were you imagining that these effort to bring the two communities closer together would evolve?
Well, let me first say rather bluntly that I realize that everything takes longer than Hoyer hopes. So I think that's a very short, fair conclusion, but it's not the only correct answer. You have to imagine a few years ago when I started together with Maurizio Bona this effort. I came from the point that, as I laid out in the introduction, that I always thought that science and scientific evidence must be the basis for decisions, and that was very well resonated by all panelists. I mean, everybody here is of the same opinion. So that was number one. And number two was the atmosphere in Geneva. Geneva is maybe the only city in the world which has so many UN governmental and non-governmental organizations, plus one of the biggest international scientific organization. So I thought, why not bringing through that fantastic environment science and policy closer together? And I was positively surprised how much interest there was in the diplomatic circus to learn about science. I was always confronted with the questions, what are you doing at CERN? How are you doing it at CERN? And what are the consequences? And how can people work together? So relatively easily without any hidden agenda, etc. So taking all this together, then it was obvious that we should try to touch base and to interconnect more closely between the IPU and the scientific community. That means in this case CERN. And I'm very, very happy that we are here now, that we have diplomats, parliamentarians who are really interested in science and who want to bring forward this working group on science and technology. And here my additional plea is, please allow scientists from time to time to participate in this working group, because then you have achieved something more than if you only in inverted commas discuss between yourselves. So it took a bit longer, but we are nearly there. We are nearly there. So
Indeed. Thank you very much. So I'll now go through the questions coming from the audience. I'll start with Matthew Chalmers' questions. Fundamental exploration such as particle physics is under increasing pressure to deliver impact beyond science. Yet experience shows that the greatest spin-offs from fundamental exploration are accidental. What is the IPU working group's position on the value of blue skies research versus more applied science? I'd like perhaps Ambassador Omar, if I could give the floor to you on this question that concerns the IPU. So the question is basically, how do you expect the IPU working group to balance between more fundamental research and more applied science? And then I would like to have the opinion of Monsieur Larive on this as well, from the point of view of the working group.
Should Monsieur Larive start or I start?
I'm just not sure that he could hear the question right now. Monsieur Larive, vous avez pu... That's why I was going to start with you, if you allow me, Ambassador Omar.
Very good. So I will be, if Monsieur Larive allow me, I will explain, but I will prefer to respond to the first question, that since we start in 2016, what happened? No, we did a lot. In June 2016, we held the first roundtable for peace, for science and peace, where We brought all Gulf states and Israel and the Palestinians around science. In 2016, we decided that if we cooperate in water, that will be a brilliant idea to turn elements of conflict to reason for coexistence under the umbrella of science. In 2017, we held the second meeting for the roundtable, where everybody, Bahrain, UAE, Oman, everybody came with Israel, Palestine, and we talked. We talked a lot. We came up with the idea of science and technology and to establish a parliamentary network in science and technology. Since then, we've visited all the neighborhood. I went with the Secretary General to the deserts of Israel and for the deserts in Palestine to see labs there, cooperation, how science can provide real peace. So this is the answer. And we hold the first ever assembly about science. And it was held and it came and it was addressed by the director of CERN. We did a lot. And right now we have an energy with a parliamentarian who's leading the work, which is Monsieur Larif. Is the energy behind institutionalizing science and bringing science back to the IPU. So he's the force behind it. And so this is the response for the first question to add on Professor Hoyer. And I don't think that anybody can add on his words, but this is an explanation from our side. And then to answer the second question about fundamental science and applied science. Yes, we are by nature, we are pro-fundamental science. We are asking for considering the year 2022, the year of fundamental science. IPU sent a letter for all the organizations that we worked with, that considering the year 2022 a fundamental science. That shows that we are by nature, humanity by nature is go to fundamental science. The access of research and fundamental science should be part of the human rights of nature. So fundamental science is the base that we can all share. And it is the duty for scientists to share all the knowledge of fundamental science. So if this will be the answer of the IPU, I will be very happy if needed more explanation. This is a good chance for us to talk about the activities of considering the year 2022, the year for fundamental science. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Larive, j'aimerais avoir aussi, si vous êtes d'accord,
Mr. Larive, if you could give me your opinion on this aspect, the balance between fundamental science and applied science and technology, and the work of the working group of IPU, and the fact that technological results are not always linked to fundamental research. You've seen it that sometimes when we want for something to work, we need a solution very quickly. So there is a lot of pressure from the policymakers. But your mic is on mute, I think.
The role of the group is central. Fundamental research on one side and applied research on the other. Like some sometimes forget, and like the discussions that I've had, we came to an agreement. Fundamental science is best based on results. It's scientific facts. And politicians need to understand that. Then there's the application. And that's where politicians can intervene. Indeed, how, behind all this basic science, can be the consequences of this in human society? At some point, the working group can intervene. There are various steps. We talked about this. We need to get all the initiatives, all the will, and this is central to these issues. I arrived in 2017 and I asked this question regarding science, and they wanted a parliamentarian who could talk about this, and we met, and since then things have moved forward. But diplomacy takes time, and we are building this step by step. There are other organizations, perhaps UNESCO, perhaps Jacob Bessina, who's working on it, nanotechnologies. There are structures working on this, and in the working group we need to invite scientists and perhaps philosophers, artists. Our role is to know, as responsible for our people, because that's why we are elected, how is fundamental science going to be applied locally, and then how will it happen? How will it be mediated? We talked about that. At some point we will have to have a common language, and science is a great one. We will have to make sure that a lot of politicians understand what we're talking about, because we are not trained to do everything. I understand some things, but some politicians do not have this knowledge. So we will try to simplify in order to explain this in detail, because everything's involved. We need to make sure, indeed, this is part of all parts of life. I talked about the legal aspects as well. Parliamentarians need to think about all of this, and we need to convince, and that is the job. It's our job. We've managed to convince others, other states and other parliamentarians all over the world, and that's a real challenge that we needed to make sure that our policies are considered following scientific actions, because we are in the middle of a pandemic and each country have different actions following the pandemic. Everyone sees how they need to think about this, and the parliaments decide, and in order to decide they need scientists and simplification of the facts. And I would go even further, because in Western countries there are contradictions. At some point we need to think upstream, because through media we need to make sure to be convincing and constructive for the populations in the future.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Now a question which concerns actually the young generation. Dr. Azer, I would like to ask this question to you. It's coming from Stephen Ben. How can parliaments around the world best encourage younger scientists and engineers to interact with them? Dr. Azer? Dr. Azer. Could you hear the question? We cannot hear your answer, probably because you are muted.
Thank you, Ms. Antonella. Yeah, can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
Oh no!
Yes,
I'm sorry. The sound quality is really bad.
I'm not muted. I can.
Okay, Dr. Azer,
just a moment. Can you hear me now?
We would really like to hear you well. Really like to hear you well. Unfortunately, it's not the case, and I'm sorry.
One last try. Can you?
It's not working.
No.
I'm sorry.
Marianne, you are logged in twice. Maybe you have to log out once.
Like this?
No, I'm sorry, Marianne. It is really not working. So the question is, how can parliaments around the world the best encourage a younger scientist?
It's not working. it's not working, you cannot.
No, I'm sorry.
No, it's you can hear me.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Dr. Azar. It's really hard that we cannot hear you. That's really unfortunate.
No, I didn't try again. Can you hear me now? When you said I'm sorry, I kept.
There is no problem.
Okay. So okay, we'll try to solve again the issues offline. I'd like actually encore une fois, Monsieur Larive, si vous pouvez répondre à la
Mr. Larive, if you could answer the question, because this is regarding parliamentarians. So how parliaments across the world can encourage scientists and engineers and the new generation to interact with them. First of all, we need to make the right political decisions. And the first decision is to help research, help with fundamental research. So in all fields, we're talking about the scientific field right now, but the impact in our societies is huge. So we need to also support fundamental research, human sciences, technology, which is tough, but it's the whole that represents society. So parliaments need to invest financially and structurally. We need universities, we need to give the means, we need to hire a lot of professors in order to train as many young people as possible for this new idea of science. That is to say, this is a webinar, for instance, where we are trying to build bridges between science and policies and the parliaments. And this is what we need to do with the new generation. The parliaments need to tell them that they are very important and that they will be involved in the development of our future societies. Thank you very much. That was very clear. Now there are some more questions.
Oh, sorry, I'll switch to English again. Sorry, Professor Halbert, because the questions are for you. Actually, they concern Argentina, and I think you could read them on the question and answers chat line. So if you could perhaps summarize, they concern really very closely Argentina. So if you could explain us a little bit better, actually the questions, and then give us the answer, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Yes, Antonella, thank you very much for giving me the floor. And I really appreciate this question coming from the Argentinian parliament. So the question is, it's a comment related to a recent webinar that was held in Argentina, coming from with people from Parliament and from the Universidad Austral, from the Austral University, the School of Government in Argentina, which is very active in these issues. And they recently issued a very interesting technical report on science and parliament in Argentina, and this is legislation based, informed on evidence. So I thank you very much for this question, because I'm very happy to mention this. I think this is quite exemplary, and it's an important step in the right direction, very much in line with what the IPU is doing. So I congratulate my fellow Argentinians, and I encourage them to continue with this idea. I participated, in fact, in this webinar 2 weeks ago, and the conclusions of this technical report are very interesting, and I encourage the Universidad Austral to translate this technical report and to share it also with other parliaments, and in particular with the IPU. I mean, I'm just suggesting this because I think I read the whole technical report, and the results are very interesting on how different legislators and scientists consider how they see the relationship between scientists and parliamentarians. So I understand there are a couple of bills being passed in the Argentine legislature, and they have to do with a bicameral committee on science and technology and science for policy making, and also there's a suggestion of creating an office like similar to the UK Post, the Parliamentary Office on Science and Technology. I think these initiatives are very, very important. So I'm very happy with this. Thank you for this question.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Hallberg. Now there is a comment from Ireland, and it's a reminder, actually. The participant is reminding everybody that it's St. Patrick's Day today. So yeah, it's a comment. Just a second. Okay, it's being answered online. Let me go, sorry, to another question. That is a comment about the language, the issue about the language that was raised by Professor Hoyer. The comment is saying, actually, it's not just a matter of language. It is a matter of attitude. It is a matter of willingness to talk to each other. How would you like to reply to this?
Well, I agree. It's a question of the open mind, that you are willing to discuss. But the moment you are willing to discuss, you must also be willing to try to understand what the other person means. And that means you have to not only to hear what they say, but to listen exactly, and not to interpret your own thoughts into the statement of the other. So you have to be very open, and you have to request clarification. You have to understand the definition of the words the other person is using. Yeah? You need an open mind, but as soon as you start discussing, I hope that you have an open mind.
Yes, indeed, and actually, the person was commenting. It really depends on the group that you are representing as well. So
why should it be the group? I think it should be independent of the group. If once you are open, it doesn't matter where you come from. That's at least my conviction.
Yeah. Do you see a role for the IPU working group on this and creating this common understanding, common language, and a shared willingness to talk to each other?
Well, I hope that they have it, but I interpreted the intervention of Michel Larive like this. He mentioned the word that they have to define, that they have to understand each other. So I think at least I have the impression that we have with Michel Larive at least one person with an open mind. Of course, there are more, certainly, but
certainly more.
It's the right signal which you are sending.
Certainly there are more. I'd like to ask another question to Professor Hallberg. This time it doesn't concern Argentina, but it concerns more the role of, countries other than Europe and perhaps the United States or Russia on the other side, or perhaps China. What is the role of the other countries in this dialogue between science and parliaments, and how do you see this growing, and how do you see this country to be really represented in this global dialogue?
Well, thank you, Antonella. I don't know much about the details of Parliament in this sense, but I've had participation in several international organizations, and I'm happy to see that countries that are not the central countries you mentioned, for example, Latin America or Africa or other parts of the world, are becoming every time more involved and more active in their participation in many of these international organizations. I can mention, for example, the ICTP, the International Center for Theoretical Physics, which was founded by a Nobel laureate, Abdul Salam, and it's in Trieste in Italy. They are very active in promoting science in Africa, for example, also in Latin America. I mean, my first trip as a scientist was to the ICTP several decades ago, but thanks to that institution, which depends also on the area and on the Italian government, I was able to do my first trip and to really meet the scientists that were working in my field. But the action they have in Africa is very important, and I believe and I'm convinced that they are really developing science in African countries. So, I mean, we are slowly getting global, and this is very important also to include the other regions, because most of the discussions are European and the US and North Asia centralized. So I really thank you. I mean, the fact that I'm here is also shows how the IPU and CERN also consider important to invite other regions. So that's why I'm so thankful for giving us a possibility of expressing our concerns, our ideas, and also to contribute to this important initiative.
Thank you very much. Maintenant, il y a un peu quelques questions, Monsieur Larive.
There are some questions for Mr. Larive. An important theme. Can you hear me? Yes. How is the working group going to start its work? Will they be using things that are already existing, that have been developed by other working groups? Or will everything start from scratch? Is there a will to start from something that's already existing? And how do you see the evolution of this? Yes, there's part of the answer in your question. Indeed, we're not going to reinvent anything. We're not starting from scratch. So we will start from some of the previous work. The parliamentarians' work isn't to have research projects. The research needs its freedom. That is also fundamental. It's essential. The researchers need to do their research in the way that they wish to. There are international organizations that did works on this. UNESCO. We need to look into this and start from there. The parliamentarians need to think how science can act for the good of the population. And we need to use, obviously, works that have been done by scientists, of course, but also looking at mediation with the civil society as well. I'm really insisting on that, because if we don't do it ourselves as parliamentarians, it will be the private sector. So those who will take care of this, and they will do it, and they might not think about the population that will see the impact of the research. So our work is to look into this and then to suggest perhaps at international level some solutions, some tools, so that the parliamentarians from all over the world can take the tools that they need in order to build, in turn, the legislative framework with their culture and depending on their economies, and to also think about the needs of their populations. So we have a lot of technological developments in Europe that are different from other parts of the world. So we need to take this into account. Now, how is the working group going to function? I don't know, because we will start at the end of the spring. So, like the founder said, Mokhtar, this working group is in place now. It needs to function. So we will define how it will function. But what I would like is to make sure that scientists are invited as often as possible and are part of the thought process. And even more than that, when there are charters that are being drafted and so on, we need to ask them if what we are saying is correct. So it's not just a language, it's really a way of being. How do we coexist between scientists, parliamentarians, and the population? We need to have a communication tool, and this interface, perhaps this IPU will give it to us, and this working group as well. Thank you very much.
Now we have a very important question. I was actually expecting something along these lines, and it's good that it's coming from the audience. It is about the gender gap. Actually, let's take it from the other side. Let's call it a gender balance rather than the gender gap. But the question is there. So the two walls, so science and parliaments are two environments where we can observe a gender unbalance. So how do you think? And I would like to ask all of you, actually, I'd like to hear also from Dr. Azar, if possible, but we're going to try again another time, perhaps, but also all the other panelists to comment on this question. And of course, it would be interesting to hear what do you think will be the concrete steps, really not just ideal things that we can think of, but concrete steps that can actually well, contribute to fix the problem, because there is indeed a problem there. So perhaps I'd like to start with Professor Hallberg, if you could tell us.
Yes, Antonella, thank you. This is a very important question. I would have liked to address it also in my 5 minutes, but it was very short. So thank you so much, whoever posted this question. You know, the gender issue, it's very important, and it is a problem we have. This is part of the cultural change we need to face. You know, UNESCO 2 years ago said that less than 30% of scientists were women, and less than 30% in worldwide. But if you look at STEM sciences, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, it's even less because, well, the 30% includes all sciences, including social sciences, where we have a large amount of women. But if you look at the physics, chemistry, mathematics, computer science, engineering, it's much less. I would just venture to say it's less than 20%. So it's really worrying, and we need to do something about it. This is on the science side. In Parliament, of course, there's still a problem, as you say. I don't know that issue too much, but I know that, for example, in Argentina, they are really trying to get a balance between women and men. And this is very important since they are our representative. So here's where I see a very concrete action to take. Science policy, the involvement of scientists in policy making and vice versa. I think this is, it's not new, but it's a very interesting and promising field in which I hope many women will also be involved, because it has to do with the social responsibility of scientists on one hand. So I really think that this aspect will attract more women to doing science. So, well, in short, it is a problem. We must address it. I'm very glad we can talk about it here, and I hope the IPU and the local parliaments will also address this issue. It has to do with how science is considered in every country. I mean, there's no reason why there shouldn't be a balance in all sciences in the countries, and this has to do then with the cultural change I was mentioned. We still have things to change.
Thank you very much indeed. Dr. Azar, can we perhaps try with your microphone if...
Yes.
Great.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'm happy. Okay, let's do it quickly. I'm glad about this question because I'm in the STEM field. I'm basically an engineer with technology and a parliamentarian. I was a parliamentarian. So let's go to the root cause first. The root cause is like has many causes. There is the stereotyping that women cannot do politics or women cannot be in the technology or STEM field. There is the mindset. There is some lack of self-confidence. There are many reasons. Some of the reasons come from the women themselves and some from the society. For example, the stereotyping, it's like it comes from the society that there are jobs only dedicated for men. And everything that comes from the society needs awareness. And by this, I would mention a very nice campaign that was done in Egypt from the National Council for Women. It's an awareness campaign with very small, short videos, less than a minute, about women being in STEM, about women being in the parliament. This was like went virally because everyone saw this campaign and it raised the awareness. And for stereotyping also, we need to enforce sometimes the presence of women by having that quota system. Unfortunately, sometimes we need to enforce it. The second problem or the second reason for women not being there is the mindset that a success and likability to do those jobs are only for men, not for women. And by this, they need empowerment to have more self-confidence in themselves, to make sure that these jobs are perfect for women who are multitasking, who can do it. Another problem is for women, not only the lack of self-confidence, but it's the fear. It's the fear to fail in a male-dominated field. And for this, we always tell women that the ship is in port, is safe, but it's not designed to stay in the port. They have to sail out to sea and do new things. And this, again, is the awareness, and more than the awareness, in the mentorship. So whether the women in parliament or politics or women in STEM, they need mentors, and not only mentors women, but also mentor men who can give them like more power to go and to answer their questions they ask between themselves. A final thing for women is they are perfectionists. And I recall a study by HP, an HP report that found that men would even apply for a job if they meet only 60% of the qualifications, but women, they have to meet 100%. And for this sense of perfection, a good training is essential, both for women and men. And another experiment in Egypt was good, that the National Council for Women made those training sessions for young women parliamentarians, and it made a huge difference in their performance. So sometimes it is the society, then we need to deal with awareness, and sometimes it's the women themselves, and this is by empowering them, whether by their qualifications or morally, by making them feel more self-confident. That's what I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Azar. While your microphone is still working, I'd like you to please, if you can, reply to the previous question you remember that connected actually with this one. And it was about the training of young scientists and engineers. And I think that this connects very well with the gender gap.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Antonella. And I'd like to answer this question as a scientist, as an engineer too, because I'm basically an engineer. I find it's very important to involve them, and it's frustrating not to involve them. So there are different ways. The first thing is involving them in hearing sessions while discussing some laws in their areas of expertise, like when we have a law on something related to biotechnology, would invite those scientists working there and hearing them. It gives them more confidence, and it gives us as members of parliament the feedback on areas that we wouldn't hear from while reading, for example. The second suggestion is creating a unit for science and technology in each parliament. And I recall, I know there are parliaments applying this. And for instance, the British Parliament, they have a unit called POST. And it was a dream for them. It took maybe 9 years to establish this unit, but it's there. If we have a unit, we can get those young scientists again as trainees. And finally, issuing laws that support innovators and young scientists. This is important to empower them in their own research and jobs. And I believe that the IPU working group of science technology will be an umbrella and a role model for these parliament units that we're talking about all over the world. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. We feel lucky to be hearing you, actually. Thanks a lot. That is great. Coming back to the question about the gender balance, I'd like to hear from Professor Hoyer, if you agree, to give us your views on this.
Well, first of all, I can only agree with Karen and Marianne about the different aspects they were mentioning. But I think one aspect they have not mentioned, and that is that we need the cultural change already at very early age. That means at home with the parents, because already there you might sometimes you put the kids into different roles, and that's wrong. Yeah. And so that has to start at the early age, because much later you won't correct that easily. So that's one thing. The second thing is that we observe the gender gap opening at higher and higher positions. And there are different reasons for it, of course. So you have to think about instruments to interest the kids at all ages in science, in particular in STEM. And that I found relatively easy to interest them. They were eager, even at this at the age of at this age of 7, 8, or whatever. The problem was then later to keep them with their interest. So there one has to find some instruments, and then instruments could be, for example, not explicitly creating jobs for young women, but requesting that one considers and encourages young women to apply for these positions, and then have the selection committee, the composition of the selection committee, well balanced. Because everybody, I think everybody, be it female, be it male, whatever, everybody has some unconscious prejudices or biases. You might not know about it, but you have it at some stage. So it's very, very important to balance the selection committee very well. And that can bring some success. And for example, in the Helmholtz Association in Germany, there is quite some success with attracting young women into young investigator groups, into leading positions through such measures.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Monsieur Larive, je vous passe la parole. Par contre, comme on est bientôt à...
Mr. Larive, I will now give you the floor. The time is now limited, so please be brief. I cannot be brief. I know it's a complex question. Now, of course, you know, I'm a universalist, and the first universal truth is equality between men and women. That's my point of view. In French law, there are requirements for equality. Otherwise, you are fined. You pay a fine. And about women representatives. It varies from one country to another, from one region to another. And indeed, there are more women in humanities than sciences. That may be true, but we see, as Dr. Hoyer just said, that leader and higher positions are less there is less equality between men and women, and that's where we must trigger changes. And indeed, in decision-making bodies, we might require equality because we need women as well in these kind of positions. And there is a willingness. In France, current affairs, and there is a current movement to improve the gender balance, but there is still room for improvement. Indeed.
All the questions that we got on gender gap. So I hope that what our panelists said was actually clarifying the issue. We also had other questions on the Q&A, but of course the time is limited, but I remind everybody that this is just the first step. And now I would like to invite Ambassador Omar to take the floor and tell us, share with us all your thoughts. Thank you very much.
Well, really, thank you very much for giving me the floor and for this amazing and questions and amazing panelists. And I would like just to add regarding gender that we are honored for the IPU to be leading in gender. I'm honored to work in an establishment where 80% are women. I'm honored to work in gender equality and in participation in the parliament. We worked on the fields, on the ground with parliaments. We raised the amount of participation from 1% 10 years ago in 2011 to 27%. This is an effort that it is an objective of the IPU. For science, it's different. It depends on the scientific results. You cannot apply the same methods of equality on science. Yes, of course, but there are scientific results. And then regarding youth, yes, we also, in 2011, we did a forum for the young parliamentarian. They are important. They are extremely important. They are not the future. They are the present. And they are also the past. And the role is extremely important. And merging the parliamentary network and the working group of science with the young parliamentarians, that will be of the essence and the result. And in order to wrap up this session, I would like to start as Dr. Karen was starting with her say, but I would like to start with a wonderful say from Avicenna, from 1,000 years ago. Avicenna is the father of medicine and science. And he said that there are no incurable diseases, only the lack of will. And there are no worthless herbs, only the lack of knowledge. This is it. 1,000 years ago, they understand the reason of having a relation between will, a political will, and a scientific knowledge. Probably, if we have a truthful political will and a truthful scientific knowledge, we will cure all the diseases, even corona. To wrap up, I would like to say, yes, science is fun, and it is the idea and the heart of people like Professor Hoyer who led us to right now. It is the collective work that you initiated that led us to what we have right now. The energy that we have from Monsieur Larive, it is led to what we have right now. And the obra di arte that was given by Professor Karen, it is true. This is what the people want to listen to. It is the relation between humanity and scientists. Scientists should not be preserved as people around living in an ivory tower. So this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to open, to let, as Monsieur Hoyer said, Professor Hoyer said, that They need to know how scientists work, how science works. Let politicians know how scientists work. Open the doors for science. And just to wrap up, I would like to thank also the president of the IPU for his opening remarks. I know that he wanted to attend. I'm happy that our Secretary General attended. And it is clear that there is no need, there is a need for a binding charter on ethical use of science and technology. In the process of the upcoming, with this charter, politicians and scientists will get together, will know each other more. This interaction itself is a real scientific experiment on how science can really help all humanity, not only the people who can buy, all humanity on equal footing, with an access for fundamental science and support of the applied science. So I would like to thank you all, and thank you very much for Dr. Hoyer, for Monsieur Larib, for Dr. Karen, for Azer, for Antonella. Thank you very much, Antonella.
Thank you, everybody, and goodbye. Thank you to our panelists, of course. Thanks a lot. Goodbye.